The story begins with, after a blinding flash, two guys find themselves outside an ancient Greek Hall of Fame. The sky above the hall was the bluest of blues, and there was a layer of snow-white absorbent cotton underfoot. One of the guys looked around at the full scale of the ancient Greek Hall of Fame and assumed that they were in paradise. His friend was a little frightened by this. At the moment, Jade went into a rage and slapped the guy on the cheek with all his might. Jay took his friend by the shirt, because he had unfinished business in the real world, and he didn't want to leave it so soon. The boy didn't understand why Jay had decided to take it out on him for everything that had happened, and then he offered to go to a nightclub afterward. Jay starts fighting with his friend over what happened. The guy demanded to be taken out immediately. As they continue to fight each other, the guys don't hear strange sounds resembling wings become audible in the background. An unknown man in armor appears above the Hall of Fame. The man demands that Jay leave his earthly grudges behind, for he was the one chosen by the god. Jay, still holding his friend by the shirt, turned to look at the angel. The boy didn't understand what earthly insults were being talked about, or what the unknown man had even said. The angel lands in front of the guys and explains that he obeys the great god of creation, who will guide the guys to the light and banish the darkness. The guys continue to stare at the man with wings in bewilderment. Jay jumps up abruptly and approaches the angel with his objections. Jay immediately demands of the angel that things happen without any same-sex interactions. Angel, not realizing what Jay is talking about, just shrugs it off in response. Jay's friend, after hearing this, hits him on the head with all his might. As Jay falls, he asks the angel again for an answer. Jay sits on the sidelines silently scratching his head. The boy comes closer to the angel and gets down on one knee. With all due respect to the man, he presents himself as the Lamb of God, ready to listen to the angel's instructions. Jay felt indignant, for his friend had never believed in God before. He was still wondering what the hell was going on with him. Angel takes a face and bewilderedly states that everything that has happened is strange, because two people were called, but only one should be the hero. The angel concludes that all of this is the will of God and demands that they follow him. Turning around, the angel proceeded into the inner hall of glory. The two boys looked at the departing angel in bewilderment. In the moment, both guys got excited and called themselves brave recruits. Jay immediately began to imagine being surrounded by throngs of girls, something he had long wished for in his past life. Jay wanted to see pixies and other mythical creatures, because in his fantasies all the girls were pretty enough, and since he is a hero, he can let himself have them all. Having finished dreaming, the boys followed the angel. The angel followed them into the building, where they could see a huge Greek-style room. Jay assumed it was a heavenly palace, while his friend thought it must be a temple. After passing through another door, the boys, accompanied by an angel, entered a hall in which there were a large number of other angels. They all bowed down in unison and addressed God Almighty. At the end of the hall was a small throne with an unknown sphere on it. All the angels continued to worship and address God Almighty. Jay looked at the throne and assumed that the glowing orb was the god of creation. The thought of running away flashed through his mind, but his mind knew it was too late. Afterward, Jay looked around and noticed that all the angels were on their knees. The boy assumed that he should kneel too. Jay's friend, without a second thought, immediately ducked his head and knelt down. Jay was amazed that his friend was getting things done so quickly. But in the moment, he remembers his character. Jay, realizing he has no other option, reluctantly gets down on one knee himself. The angel who had escorted them to the hall before turns to the Lord and explains that this time they have two chosen ones. The man asked him to make a verdict and solve the problem. Jay doesn't understand what the angel is talking about and decides to add his opinion. The guy explains that he just wants to return to his world, where there will be magic and many races, because this is his dream. Angel jumps up from his knees and turns angrily to Jay. The boy jerked a little, startled, because he hadn't expected such a reaction. Angel, in a gruff voice, tells Jay that this is ignorance on his part and mere mortals are not allowed to speak like that, stating that he has no right to be chosen. The angel takes a knee again and asks the Lord God to transform into a look that all present can understand. An unusual sphere of figurative energy decides to address the newly arrived boys, stating that they all have the potential to become sons of light and have the blessing of a son of God. Sphere adds that they are indeed sons of light, and so he sends them to another world to stop the darkness. Jay's not brilliant intellect picks up on the fact that he doesn't much like talking to some ball, so he gets the idea to change that. Jay closes his eyes and begins to imagine a little girl with blue hair. In a moment, the sphere begins to slowly transform into something unusual, which is noticed by all the angels present. The sphere completes the transformation and a small blue-haired girl appears on the throne. Jay was thrilled that he had succeeded and the throne was now truly his fantasy. The angels were all horrified, the crowd turning very pale at this turn of events. Jay's friend, not much different, was also thrilled that the ball of light had transformed into a cute little girl. Jay excitedly points to the angel who escorted them out, stating that he and absolutely no one told them that the Lord could be who they wanted. The guy takes Jay by the shoulder and confirms his words that the angel didn't say anything to them about it. Through the guy's smile, his intuition told him that not everything would go so easily after this. With fear on their faces, all the angels cried out in unison that Jay was not worthy to be chosen, for he had insulted a saint. The angels sharply reached for Jay, causing him to fall backward to the ground. In his mind, he realized that this was the end for him, because angels didn't have a sense of humor. All the angels refused to call Jay the Son of Light after that. The boy's face paled, for this would ruin all his plans. The angels took turns offering punishment options to the saint. The boy covered his head in despair. He was scared. At this point, an angel with golden hair approaches the holy god, explaining that although he has done many disrespectful things, he should still have a chance to become the son of the Holy One. The girl smilingly hopes that the saint will forgive Jay and Gabrielle will deal with him instead of God. Reluctantly, the holy god agrees and allows Jay to be kept alive. Jay held his head up and continued to cover himself from the indignation of all the angels. At that moment, the girl came over and put her hand on his head. Jay opens his eyes and is slightly embarrassed by the angel's beauty. The girl asks God for forgiveness for the boy's foolishness. Turning her head back, the angel abruptly asks Gabriel to destroy the guy immediately. Jay didn't quite understand exactly what the angel meant by the word destroy. The girl covers her eyes, at which point Jay disappears and numerous feathers appear in his place. After moving to a new place, his friend immediately takes to comforting Jay. The guy was ready to take on the responsibility of the Chosen One and send his friend to another world, as he wanted. Jay tearfully hugged his friend. The guy asked that Jay recruit a couple dozen brides in another world and come back. Jay immediately stated that he would do it for his friend. Angel comes to Jay with a smile and asks him to follow her. Taking Jay by the shirt, the angel dragged the boy behind her. The friend said his last goodbye. Putting his hands behind his head, the boy silently followed the angel. He tried to reflect on all the recent events. In his thoughts, Jay remarked that the god was too stingy, for he wouldn't let him be turned into a lowly. So he also wouldn't let him become the chosen one. Angel wondered in a moment what the guy was muttering to himself. Jay was immediately awake and a little nervous. Jay assumed the angel could read his mind. Stopping in front of the golden doors, the angel points at them with his hand and explains that they have come. Jay doesn't quite understand why the girl brought him to a half-empty room, since there was only a bed standing there. Jay blushed slightly, his mind racing with thoughts of why the girl had brought him to this very room. The guy assumes that since he lost the election, it might as well be punishment. At the moment, the girl came closer and hit the guy on the head. Jay immediately stopped daydreaming from such a blow. Taking in his face, the guy pondered the option that he was a gentleman, and this sort of thing was only solved with his mouth, even though he'd had to punch people 3 times. Jay was even yelling at this point. The girl, tired of listening to Jay, walks over to the bed and sits on it. With a smirk, the angel looked at the boy and wondered if it was his time to scream. It didn't matter to her, because no one would be able to come after him and save him. Jay realizes that the girl is reading his mind, since he hasn't said anything before. With a laugh, the girl explains that the guy shouldn't make such a big fuss, as she is an angel informant and can read other people's minds. Jay thinks it's lovely, but still clarifies if he can sit next to the girl. Angel demands that the guy stand at a distance. Standing strutting, the guy silently continues to listen to what the angel informant will tell him. The girl explains that Jay's actions and dishonor God, but they were still willing to let him go to another world. The guy comes a little closer and interjects if he really has a chance left. In his thoughts, the boy was glad his little sister angel would send him to another world after all. The girl was a little annoyed at the guy's levity. The angel shows a small sphere glowing with blue light surrounded by red electrical pulses. The girl calls his other world the Oscar world. Angel continues the story of how hundreds of years ago the gods and demons came to an agreement to completely close the entrance to the netherworld. Angel compliments that everything changed after the demons started sending darkness upon them and trying to destroy and control the angels. Jay gets it right away. He clarifies that this is why the very sons of light happened. The girl confirms the guy's words, adding that this is also a problem. Pointing her finger at Jay, she compliments that this is why they need a backup in addition to the Son of Light. She then slowly placed her hand over her own and added that after Jay enters the alternate world, he will get some of her power. Folding his arms, the boy stepped closer. Jay was interested in what the girl's ability was. Angel looked angrily at the guy. She reminded him that only half the ability would get Jay. Jay leaned over the girl and also asked if he could look into the memories. The girl nodded approvingly in response. The angel, having admonished, adds that to pass on a partial glimpse of memory is the limit of what she can give, except the power of a god. Jay was excited, for with this ability he would be able to determine the strength of his opponents. Taking the girl by the hand, the guy agrees to her terms. Angel was a little confused by this closeness. Jay was momentarily embarrassed to take the angel's hand. Giving Jay a smack on the head, the girl stepped aside. The girl decides to complete all the fooling around and move on to the final stage. The girl extends her hand towards the guy, and a bluish-colored celestial seal appears around him. The angel adds that Jay's current body is not suitable for teleportation, and so she will change it. Jay bemusedly suggests that a prettier body would be quite suitable for teleportation. With a smirk, the girl asks Jay not to worry, as his body will be attractive to the opposite sex. Lastly, the girl asks the guy to take care of himself on the road. The boy begins to suspect something amiss in the angel's words. Reaching out his hand to the girl, he clarifies whether she's going to teleport him so immediately. The girl snaps her fingers and says goodbye to the guy one last time. With great speed, the guy starts moving. Jay doesn't have time to ask the angel to give him some more time. Jay hurtles through the universes, destroys the third wall, and promptly continues flying. Losing consciousness, Jay struggles to open his eyes. The first thing he sees is blue sky. An unidentified golden-haired girl lies on the sand. The girl doesn't understand why there is so much sand around her. Looking around, the girl realizes that there is only sand and a small number of cacti around her. Next to her, the girl notices a tombstone plaque, which immediately piques her interest. The tombstone was quite old, so the damage in the form of cracks covered the entire tombstone. Jay begins to realize that since the angel planned to change his body, apparently it is now the body of the unknown Elena. Jay examines his body and realizes that feminization has occurred after the rebirth. Jay was utterly shocked when he realized he was a little girl devoid of manhood. Extremely frightened, the boy screamed across the desert. Jay was mortified at this news and couldn't budge. Still in the hot desert under the blazing sun, Jay continued to resent his position. Jay kicked the tombstone with all the force a little girl could muster. From the blow, Jay falls to the ground because of the pain, for the girl's leg was too fragile. Jay, in tears, had no idea there were dark angels like Gabriel thinking there was a traitor in the house of the Lord God. Jay decides to re-examine his body, realizing that he has golden hair. The girl's height was also too low, about 5 feet 30. Jay weighed a small amount. He was the likeness of the girl he'd turned the god into earlier. After examining other parts of her body as well, Jay was embarrassed by her form. Jay dropped to his knees next to the tombstone again. He was depressed by the fact that he was a little girl, because his main goal was to pick up a large number of girls of different races. Jay cried and simultaneously cried out in despair as he continued to stare at the tombstone. As he covered one glance, Jay began to feel something strange. He assumed it was the knowledge Gabriel had given him earlier. All the knowledge gained was found in an unknown scroll of ancient writings. The scroll depicted different races like elves, gnomes, orcs, and others. Also on this scroll could be seen an image of various paved trails between the mountains and lowlands. Jay was at a loss as to how the scroll was supposed to help, since it had nothing to do with the desert. In the moment, Jay gets one thought that should have helped him. Crossing his arms and closing his eyes, Jay begins to pray and ask for the memory retrieval technique. The first thing that arises in Jay's mind is an unknown huge spider. The guy realizes that a girl named Irene was struggling, but her body couldn't withstand the spells and she died. Not listening to the pleas of her companions, Irene still casts a spell to preserve the fragile souls of all those around her. At last, the girl smiles at her friends, concluding that this was her mission, namely to protect people. The guy asks his friend to stop, holding out his hand in her direction. The girl raises her hands above her head and loudly recites the forbidden spell of the 444th goddess of death's mercy. The boy was horrified at what was happening. Everything shone with a bright light. Irene, in turn, was also covered in golden light. A sharp flash. Jay finishes his meditation and opens his eyes. Jay is lying on the ground. With a frown on his face, the guy begins to realize what exactly happened to Elena. Jay, re-examining the tombstone, realizes that the original owner of the body, in order to keep her comrade safe, decided to sacrifice herself. Jay was puzzled as to why he had no team and no friends as such. The boy thinks he should look for something else useful to remember. The guy begins to concentrate his technique. A small bolt of lightning strikes Jay's head. Jay takes his head sharply, realizing he's not going to make it anymore. Jay notices his window description, immediately realizing that he was indeed able to use some sort of technique, which is what was using up his magic. Jay gets to his feet and decides to check out exactly what he has in his arsenal. Jay finds a buried wooden stick next to the tombstone. Jay also finds a ring of unknown origin, assuming that it will help him in the future, even though it is worthless. After examining the rest of his pockets, the guy realizes he doesn't have a dime, calling himself a poor god. Jay, continuing to resent his position, decides to move out across the vast desert. Jay is walking through the hot desert under the scorching sun. Jay thinks this is a small problem, and he can eat anything he meets along the way. Because of the intense heat, Jay gradually slowed down and started walking too slowly. Jay was soaking wet from the intense heat. Walking on the sand, he tried to lean on his staff to make it easier to walk. In the moment, Jay notices a small crayfish looking at him. The intense heat and dehydration is making Jay's eyes start to swim. Losing the rest of his energy, Jay drops his staff to the floor. After a second, Jay is unable to go any further, falling to the ground with no strength. Jay realizes that he can no longer walk because of his helplessness. A dark silhouette appears in the distance, heading towards Jay. The man silently walks closer and gets behind Jay's back. Jay struggles to get his rescuer to give him some water. With his dark green hand, the unknown man lifts Jay up and declares that he hasn't eaten human children in a long time, calling their meat tender and soft. Jay doesn't listen to what the orc is muttering, but continues to ask for water. The orc comes closer and takes him on the shoulder. In a moment, the question in Jay's mind is why the man carrying him has green skin. Another orc sitting on a wagon demands his companion to retrieve the girl to give to the western chieftain. After waking up after passing out in the desert, Jay notices a large amount of water around him. Jay is starting to get excited about how much water is around him. Picking up some water in the palms of his hands, Jay begins to drink the water little by little. Looking around, Jay also notices a large amount of all sorts of vegetables floating nearby. This made him a little wary. Jay is startled to realize that she is now in the cauldron. Around the cauldron, all the orcs were fussing and trying to prepare the girl for tonight's meal. Jay was lost in his face. He asked the orcs around him not to eat. Jay, terrified, immediately decides to climb out of the cauldron. Gripping the edge of the cauldron, Jay begins to feel his hands quickly begin to cauterize. Screaming in great pain, Jay immediately takes his hands off the cauldron. With tears in her eyes, the girl intensely begins to blow on her hands, trying to dull the already intense pain. Out of his last strength, Jay decides to quickly climb out of the cauldron. With difficulty, the girl manages to do so, and when she flips over, Jay falls to the ground with a thud. One of the ogres nearby intensely continues to sharpen the blade of his machete. Several of the other ogres turned away from their work and began to stare intently in the girl's direction. Jay started flitting from side to side in confusion. The ogres were everywhere, going about their daily business. One of the chief ogres orders the others to take the child and throw it back into the cauldron. Jay realized that the orcs were cruel, for the young blood had fallen into their hands. Two ogres who were heading towards the girl at the same time begin to argue sharply about who will take care of her. The argument gradually escalates into a fight. Jay realizes that this may be his only chance to escape. Glancing around to avoid being seen, Jay abruptly goes on the run. As Jay looked around, he completely failed to notice who was standing in front of him, causing him to crash into the unknown man with all his might. Jay bounces back and falls to the ground. In front of the girl's face were a large number of ogres with various weapons. With a baleful look, they all looked at Jay as if he were food. Jay continued to press his pity and beg the orcs to keep him alive. In his thoughts, the boy noted that he had often eaten boiled fish in his past life, but he realized that a boiled little girl would be much better for the orcs. Not taking the girl seriously, the orcs continued to slowly walk closer to Jay and reach out to him with their hands. The orc in the gray shirt pulled his hand toward the girl. Several brutalized orcs nearby were also trying to take the girl for themselves. Jay, not knowing what to do next, decides to ask the orcs to take him to their leader. Jay knew the orcs would understand him, for Angel Gabrielle had also given him the ability to discern the languages of the tribes, and even the accent of the desert orcs. Tears streamed down the little girl's face. Jay still wasn't used to his current thin voice. The orcs stopped in a moment. Everyone there could not believe that a child could speak Orcish. The orcs began to talk among themselves, wondering how the girl could know their language and without an accent, while the orcs decide what to do next with the girl. Jay wastes no time in eating whatever was in the cauldron. The orcs couldn't come to a consensus. Some wanted to still eat the girl. The other half wanted to understand what the girl desired. Jay continued to drink water from the cauldron and munch on various vegetables without distraction. His dehydration was still present after the long walk through the desert. In the moment, Jay also notices small scraps of meat, which he immediately decides to fish out and eat. Jay planned to fill his stomach before meeting the orc leader to feel good. Jay also noticed that the water in the cauldron had no taste at all. Realizing that orcs didn't use seasoning, Jay comes down from the cauldron and was glad that he was able to eat after all. Jay looked around himself and was kind of surprised that he still had his clothes on since the orcs were planning to eat him. The orcs were puzzled at what was happening after all. A little girl wouldn't eat and drink in such a difficult situation. One of the brutalized orcs, not wanting to take it all anymore, pounces on Jay, screaming that he wants to eat the girl. The older orc stops the rampaging orc with a single blow. The orc calls his tribesman an idiot and continues to ponder what they should do next with the girl. The older orcs group up and decide to take the girl to the leader to meet him. As they walked through the camp, they demanded that everyone else let them pass immediately. The orcs in the tribe were equally surprised that the little girl was being led towards their leader's chambers. Jay was visited by bad thoughts at this point, but he tried not to think about anything, and consoled himself that he was, after all, just short in stature and not a child. Jay realized that he should think ahead before he acted, because the only advantage he had was the powers Gabriel had given him. Jay also noticed that most of the orcs were of low intelligence, so he shouldn't even try to trick them, because he couldn't defeat them because of his weak magic and strength. Still heading to the settlement, Chief, Jay decides to activate the scouting ability. Jay examines one of the orcs for physical and magical strength. Jay also decides and considers the orc in the balaclava that brought him to this village. The first orc's thoughts at the moment were whether he should drink the water straight from the lake, assuming it might cause stomach problems. The second orc was concerned about his illness that caused him to have to wake up in the middle of the night. Jay slowly begins to familiarize himself with his abilities, noting that he can't use his technique until he closes his eyes. Jay covered one eye and was glad that he was indeed a son of light, and having such abilities was saving him a lot. Jay notices a huge tent. One of the orcs remarks that they are in place and should go inside. The leader of all orcs sitting on a throne at the end, wondering in a gruff voice why the human child wanted to see him. Jay was momentarily amazed at how strong the orc was as a leader at the moment. The chieftain's physical and magical stats were on par, relative to normal orcs. Standing next to the leader and close to him, the second orc was no less capable, but outmatched by dozens of times in magic. Jay decides to cover his eyes and find out more about the orc chieftain. Jay notices how as a child the chief was in a cage. The orc's face was embittered from all the bullying he had been subjected to. In the moment, one of the guards walks past the cage. The chief immediately decides to pounce on that one, biting the guard's hand. The man drops the key to the ground in pain. At this ollie, the man shouted loudly, attracting the rest of the guards. The guard manages to escape the orc's clutches and punches him in the face with all his might. The orc falls to the ground exhausted and passes out. Waking up in the same cage, the orc notices a red-haired girl holding out a piece of cloth to him. The girl helps the orc wipe the blood from his face. The orc reluctantly turns his head aside, but the girl continues to help him. After a while, all the prisoners are taken out of the cell. The orc, being the last one to go, notices the sleeping guard behind him. The orc realizes that this is the chance fate has given him. The orc decides to pull a hammer from his pocket to further disarm the guard. Orc swings at the defenseless guard with all his might. A serious battle breaks out between bandits and a tribe of orcs. Gradually, the men begin to lose, and the guard who had earlier hit the chief tries to escape from the camp. The orc notices this and throws a spear in the direction of his assailant. The spear pierces the man's chest, causing him to fall soullessly to the ground. The orc was glad that he was able to get revenge on his abuser. In time, the tribe was able to establish their camp as well. In the tent where the chief was, the red-haired girl was once again helping him to mend his wounds after the battle. Jay opens his eyes confusedly. He didn't understand why the scene cut off like that. The guy was sure that the main information was lurking right there. Jay decides to try his investigative ability again. The chief continued to stare at the girl in bewilderment. Jay was only able to notice basic information about the chief. Jay realizes that his attempts will be even. He decides to try and find out what the chief is thinking at the moment. Jay comes to realize that he can only count his feelings in the current time, but nothing more. Jay, despite the minor problems, was still impressed with the abilities passed down from Gabrielle. Jay doesn't know what to ask the orc. The VD content and time seemed random and uncontrollable to him. The chief decides to ask the little girl how she managed to learn the Orochi language. At that moment, Jay grinned back maliciously. Jay, with a cute face, approached the chief and clarified if he was Leo Lee. All the orcs in the chieftain's chamber were amazed that the little girl knew their chieftain. An old orc woman standing behind the chief wonders how the little girl knows their chief. The girl slowly approached the chief and repeatedly clarified whether the chief in front of her was the same one she hadn't seen in almost 11 years. The girl comes a fair distance away and falls to her knees. The female orc orders the others to stop the girl immediately. The orcish woman was concerned about the unknown guest. The girl falls at the feet of the chief and tearfully declares that she has finally been able to find her father. The girl raises her head to the chief and looks tearfully into his face. All the orcs were puzzled as to why a human child would call the chief his father. The girl clung to the orc's leg and kept calling the man her father. All the orcs were still confused at what they had heard. As he got into character, Jay continued through tears to rejoice that he had found his real father. Jay called the angel a real demon, because the girl had cut off the root of his life and thrown him into the center of the desert. Jay planned to get revenge for that later. Jay reminds himself that he was originally sent to another world to seduce beautiful girls. In the moment, a strong stench around the chief begins to develop and get to the girl as well. Jay can't stand the smell and starts coughing. All the orcs standing next to the chief wanted to hear an explanation as to how a human child could belong to their tribe. The chief was tossing from side to side, trying to come to his senses. He didn't know how it was possible. The female orc stares intently at the leader. The woman decides to check with the chief at what point a human child could have been born to that one. The chief, scratching his neck, can't recall having children in principle. Jay continued to stare at the chief with a tearful face. She wondered if he needed her anymore. The chief could not believe that the human child could have been his. He continued to ponder at what point it could possibly have happened. Jay's strength was running low. He couldn't continue to tolerate the odor that wafted from the orc's feet. Jay decides to remind the chief of a period of memories he has seen, namely from 12 years ago when he had a slave girl by his side. The chief tries to remember what the little girl is talking about, not quite sure which slave girl he is referring to. Jay was momentarily confused and thought he must have made a mistake in his magic. The girl's face turned a little pale. The woman comes closer and reminds them that 12 years ago it was the chief who founded their clan, which is what the girl is talking about. The chief immediately gets the whole point. He starts to remember which girl Jay is talking about. The chief rarely rises from his throne, which scares Jay a little. The chief begins to stretch his arms toward the little girl. The chief begins to scrutinize the girl's face to see if she looks anything like an orc. Jay folded his arms across his chest and stared at the chief, waiting for the verdict. The chief examined the girl's frail hands and the large number of bracelets on them. The chief also gave importance to the girl's eyes. The chief begins to agree little by little that the girl looks like him. At one point he stops and backs up to the throne with the statement that she is human after all and cannot be an orc. Jay realizes that he still has a chance to change his mind, since the chief hasn't denied the fact that there is a baby. The woman stares intently at the little girl. The orcs chorally declare that all the girl's words are nonsense, for they have never heard of orc humans having offspring. Jay tries to justify himself and states that he's not really human at all. One of the guards says he's so hungry. The orcs all chant for him to shut up. The female orc demands that the other orcs stop and be quiet. The woman brings her staff, made entirely of human bones, to the girl's face. At the end of it was a purple stone of power. Jay didn't quite understand why the woman held out the staff to him. The woman repeatedly began waving the staff in front of Jay's face. The woman finds this kind of reaction strange. The woman remarks absently that the girl is indeed not human, for all human girls are afraid of human bones. The woman turns to the chief and declares that the girl is indeed not human. With a smirk, Jay looked at what was happening, for he had almost managed to fool the stupid orcs. The woman decides to turn to the girl and clarify, still how she might know the language of the orcs. Jay, unable to think of anything more reasonable, explains that as soon as he heard the language, he immediately understood them, and addressed them in the same language. The woman decides to ask the final and more important question, why the girl is currently in human form. Jay mused in his mind that he didn't like the idea at all and didn't want to be the daughter of a chief himself. The girl makes up a story along the way that in fact, her skin was originally a greenish hue and was a mixture of human and orc. Jay adds that in her home settlement she was not recognized by her peers and was constantly bullied by stone throwing and humiliation. The orcs ask the chief why the humans treat them this way. The leader states with a serious face that they orcs despise dirty humans just as much. All the orcs cheered in a moment and began to raise their hands for the chieftain's words. The chief places the girl on his lap and wonders what is the matter with her mother at the moment. Jay here too makes up a story about a woman's serious illness. The chief wondered at what point it happened that the girl was reincarnated as a human being. Jay adds to the story that before she died, the girl's mother gave her to the Chamber of Commerce people, who later turned her into a human. Later on, the girl tells how with little knowledge of her own, she tried to find her missing father. It was incomprehensible to the orc woman how the girl had found them and knew the chieftain's name. The chief was also interested in the matter, for their tribe was almost in the center of the desert. The girl explains that the Chamber of Commerce people lied to her and her mom, and they were actually human traffickers. This news shook the chief to the core. He could not have expected such a turn of events. In anger, the chief clutched a nearby skull, causing it to shatter. The girl explains that she was lucky because there was a big storm in the desert. So many people managed to get out and escape. Jay adds that she was able to find the keys from the dead slave trader and open her shackles, after which she ran as hard as she could to find her father. At this point, one of the orcs was closely examining the girl's stick. The girl loudly declared with all her might that although she hadn't eaten or drank, she had the blood of desert orcs flowing in her, and so some desert wouldn't scare her away. The female orc agrees with the girl's words, recognizing her as a true desert orc. The chief rises from his throne and raises the girl above his head. The orc wonders what his daughter's name is. All of the orcs were silently watching what was happening. Jay didn't much like where he was at. Jay introduces himself loudly with the name Elena. Overjoyed, the chief loudly proclaims that his daughter Elena is now part of the Lee clan. Everyone shouted loudly in support, calling Alice the daughter of the Lee clan. Jay wasn't quite sure why the orcs called him Alice, since he had clearly introduced himself as Elena. Jay decides to lie down on the bed and rest after a hard day. Jay realized he wasn't feeling very healthy. The girl was breathing hard and she had a high fever. Jay decides to check his pulse and see if he's okay, because if his body temperature has risen even 1 degree, his heart rate should increase 15 times. Jay, with a high fever, decides to close his eyes. He assumes he is getting a fever. 4 hours earlier, all the orcs were in the courtyard shouting that they must protect the 4 elders and kill the attackers. Elena, being close to her so-called father, wonders if the chief lived with her mother. The chieftain was confused in the moment and began to make excuses that the girl would find out for herself later. The orc called her mother a wonderful person. All the orcs laughed at the confused ringleader. One of them added that in the end the girl was also approved by Meow himself. Elena was also laughing with the orcs. She realized that she had nothing to worry about, for she was slowly beginning to be accepted as her own. Elena notices that all the orcs are starting to get used to her person, noting that it is her laughter that brings her very close and removes the psychological distance. At this point, Elena starts to lose her balance. The chief manages to catch the girl, wondering what is happening to her. Elena eagerly asks to be allowed to rest for a while. The chief immediately demands his subordinates to prepare a quiet room, and also asks the shaman to come with him. Elena immediately falls into a sound sleep and awakens deep in the night. Elena had noticed that the tribe was fairly quiet at night, despite their rambunctious nature. Elena, still in heat and severe body weakness, doesn't lose her optimism. The girl jokingly ponders what would happen to the orcs if they found out she was actually a guy. At this point, the chief along with the shaman enter the chamber. The shaman puts his hand on the girl's forehead. Elena was surprised at how cold his hand was. The shaman confirms his speculation that the girl actually has a fever. The chief is not surprised, for Helena has walked a great distance under the scorching sun and then been dipped in cold water. Elena, through the fever, begins to call her father and asks her not to leave her alone. In her thoughts, the girl wondered whether the chief would be able to resist such masterful acting. The chief declares that he will not make his daughter suffer any longer and will stay with her. Elena realized that this was her chance. The girl adds that she does not blame her father. In the moment, Elena closes her eyes and falls into a deep sleep. The desert orc settlement was located in the center of the desert on a small oasis. The desert nights were cold and windy, and the settlement was greatly aided by the vegetation along the river. Elena fell into a deep sleep. Elena is in the moment awakening under a white sky. As Jay gets to his feet, he realizes that he has reappeared in heaven. Jay doesn't observe a single angel. Gabrielle's voice is heard behind the guy, then turns around. Jay was greatly perturbed by her presence. The girl smiled back. Slowly moving closer, the angel takes Jay in the guise of a little girl in his arms and carries him along. On the way out, Gabrielle explains that this is not real space and they only have consciousness. Jay assumes that the angel is talking specifically about a dream. Jay was upset that Gabrielle had put him in the body of a little girl. Assumed she was getting revenge on him for what he had done to God. Gabrielle doesn't quite know what the guy is talking about. After all, it was exactly his choice. The girl puts her hand on Jay's head. The guy doesn't understand what Gabrielle is talking about, since he didn't ask to make a little girl out of him, assuming it's the blue-haired god's shenanigans. Gabriel asks not to disrespect God by suggesting that he look at everything again. Before Gabriel and Jay's eyes comes a shot of the guys worshipping in an angelic hall in front of a god. Jay was kind of surprised to see himself on the other side. Jay realizes that this is a frame from when he first appeared before God. Gabriel asks the guy to stay focused and keep watching. God covers his eyes grudgingly and declares that he forgives Jay. Abruptly, the god points his finger at the lads and demands that they answer his 3 questions, and upon completion, he will announce which of them is truly the chosen one. Jay was confused that he didn't remember any of this. With a serious face, the god asks the first question to the boys, namely what they will need to fight the minions of darkness. Jay states with a smile that there is only one answer to that question. Jay adds that he needs strength and seriously weapons. The guy was referring to magic weapons and a really pumped-up body. Not stopping there, Jay decides to add that on top of that he also needs money, partners, and luck. The whole room was confused at such a greedy response. The angels didn't know how to react. There was a sepulchral silence in the hall, everyone staring sharply at Jay. At this point, the guy's friend raising his hand answers with just one word, light. Guy adds that as long as there is light, no demon, no matter how strong, is worthy of the God-given light. Jay had noticed that there was still a god in front of him, but the guy was so flattered by the ones in front of him. With all his might, the god declares that this is the correct answer. Jay was amazed that this was the answer the god had expected. God moves on to the second question, namely who the hero is willing to sacrifice, his beloved or the world. Jay declares that he is not willing to sacrifice his beloved for peace. All the angels were shocked even more from Jay. Jay's friend decides to say his answer as well, namely that he is willing to sacrifice all of himself to the light without hesitation. God repeatedly praised the boy for his pure and sincere intentions. The angels were also delighted with the boy's words and began to clap for him. Jay was mortified by this outcome, for he didn't know that angels were very fond of flattery. God moves on to the final question, namely, what is good and evil? Loudly, the guy declares that light is righteousness and all shadows are evil. The god rises abruptly from his throne and declares that the guy is the real God's chosen one. Jay still couldn't figure out what it had to do with him becoming a girl. Gabriel repeatedly kicks Jay in the head and demands that he keep watching. At this point, Gabriel approaches the god and asks to hear the second candidate as well. God agrees and asks for Jay to tell them something. Jay enthusiastically states that the winner should take everything and the loser nothing, concluding by saying that the winner is always right. Jay blushed with shame. He couldn't believe he'd behaved so rudely in the hall with the angels. The angel protector drew his sword, calling Jay heresy. All the angels go from admiration to anger at Jay. All the angels start pointing fingers at Jay and calling him Satan and the devil. Gabriel reapplies to God and asks Jay to keep Son of Light as a backup. God, not wanting to punish the guy, agrees with Gabriella and asks the girl to straighten the guy out. Gabriel then carries Jay out of the gym. The boy notes that he remembers this section well. Gabrielle picks up the remote and begins to rewind to a more important topic of conversation. Gabrielle finds the time she needs and stops it. Gabrielle wondered if Jay remembered the conversation and when the Shibariha angel had come to them. Jay didn't know who he was talking about. A pretty girl walks into the room. The girl introduces herself to Shibari with a smile and explains that all of Gabrielle's power has been transferred to the Holy Sun. Jay couldn't take his eyes off the girl at that moment, assuming she was a mythical moon angel, sitting down next to Gabriel. The girls begin to talk amongst themselves about the guy's candidacy. Jay, not so understanding everything, assumes it's Gabrielle offering him a girlfriend, abruptly heading in the direction of the girls. Gabrielle pushes the guy back with all her might, causing Jay to fly back to the front door. Shibari covers her face. She was really embarrassed by the guy's behavior. Jay, lying on the floor, only cared that he was in pain after that blow. Shibari can't bear to look at the lying guy and decides to comfort him because her sister is overdoing it. The girl comes closer and sits down on her knees to lay the guy's head. Shibari wonders how Jay is feeling. Gabrielle noted that even though Jay had speech like the devil, they still plan to let the guy go to the lower world. Jay excitedly jumps up from Shibari's lap and interjects if Gabrielle's words are true. Gabrielle clarifies whether the guy accepts her assignment. Jay jokingly starts to pretend he's not interested. Gabrielle, in passing, decides to also give the guy his one wish. The girl sitting on the bed listens to Jay's wish. Jay, pointing his finger at Shibari, asks for the girl to stay with him forever. Shibari was taken aback by such a statement. After all, she hadn't signed up for such a thing. Jay embarrassingly reiterates that Shibari is the one who should stay with him forever. The girl was very confused. She asked the guy to come to his senses. After all, Gabriel doesn't give this kind of wishes. After thinking it over for a bit, Gabrielle gives an approving response to the guy's proposal. Jay and Shibari were very surprised by this. Shibari couldn't believe Gabrielle had given the okay for such a strange wish. After all, she's an angel. Gabrielle decides to fulfill his wish in a slightly different form, namely the trinity of Elena, Shibari, and Jay. Jay, realizing he had been tricked, throws his miniature crown to the ground. The guy was outraged at this turn of events. Jay screamed loudly in the room. He didn't realize what the glow was in the yard. A huge column of light rose into the sky. Gabrielle stood silently at the window and watched. Gabrielle closes the windows and suggests the others hurry before the Son of Light leaves. Jay doesn't understand what all the rush is about, reminding them that he still doesn't know anything about other worlds. Gabrielle decides to quickly teach the couple the voice of the other world. Jay, with a smile, offers to go with him soon. Shibari waves her hands away and asks the guy to stay away from her. Gabrielle throws the guy aside again, but with even more power, causing Jay to punch through one of the concrete walls. Barely recovered, Jay reminds them that Gabrielle must grant his wish. The girl activates her technique and a seal appears around her hand. Gabrielle asks to put aside all of Jay's ramblings and explains that their current bodies are not suitable for rebirth. The girl agrees to help transform a new body to suit his desires. Jay enthusiastically asks, with sparks in his eyes, to be beautiful and unbridled. Gabrielle agrees, saying that he has nothing to worry about, since his new body will attract the opposite sex. Shibari, realizing where this is going, covers his face, calling the one a complete idiot. The girl covers her eyes and tells Jay to take care of himself, because he should take care of his newly reincarnated body. The boy is confused and asks to wait, as he is still not ready to be reborn. Jay is left with many questions. Jay in Elena's body was outraged by this story. He thought it was all false memories and Gabrielle was trying to trick him. In his mind, Jay was giving this story a chance after all, for if it was true, his happiness of all things would be tied up in his life. Jay was puzzled after all he had heard. He went from deciding that it was a complete lie to being ashamed of all his deeds in front of the saints. Gabrielle herself wasn't quite sure why Jay's memory was distorted. The girl declares that she will go back and check the cause of the memory distortion herself. The angel on wings slowly rises into the sky and asks the guy to keep playing it by ear. Gabrielle decides to leave first. Elena jumps up abruptly from the bed and begs Gabrielle not to leave. The chief immediately notices the awakened daughter and smiles kindly at her daughter. Elena shrieks in surprise. The chief startled the girl with his menacing appearance. The chief continues to laugh, rubbing the back of his head in bewilderment. Elena begins to check her body and becomes convinced that her fever has gone away in just one night. The chief comes out of the girl's room and announces to the entire street that his daughter Helena is finally awake. The girl sighs heavily at what is happening. Elena decides to get out of bed. Elena, with shaky legs through force, tries to get out of bed, assuming that even after using restorative magic her body was still a little weak. Scowling, Elena promptly begins to fall to the ground. At that moment, the chief manages to catch his daughter. Through his laughter, he asks Elena to be more careful and not to rush. Elena thinks her father is a bit overzealous as the child's body is very weak. Elena begs her father to let her go, for no disease can strike the daughter of a great clan. Elena was surprised that the chief cared so much about her. The chief decides to escort his daughter on his arm to the exit. The leader comes out of the tent, and all the orcs notice Elena and wonder for her health. An orc girl standing off to the side punches one of the orcs, demanding that he stay away from Elena. The girl was glad that the orcs were worried about her condition. She was slowly starting to like being surrounded by orcs. All the orcs shouted and continued to cheer for the chieftain's daughter. Elena decides to give her father a hug, noting that her old man is quite responsible. Many orcs came up and complimented the chieftain's daughter, something the chieftain couldn't help himself from doing. Yelena noted that although she has no chance of being the son of a luminary, he has the potential to become a good actor. The chief lightly embraced his daughter. Elena had already begun to imagine being presented with the annual Academy Award for Best Actress. Elena wanted to star in melodramas and feature films. Toward the end of the day, when it was getting dark, most of the orcs settled around the fire, including Elena. In a moment looking at the very same bonfire, Elena remembers that a few days ago, she almost turned into a boiled girl. Looking at her hands, Elena remarks that she had the foresight to come up with this fairy tale that the entire settlement believed. Elena thought in her mind that her caution and vigilance was what had gotten her out of such a dangerous situation. At this point, the chief pulls a handful of salt out of his sack. The chief begins to rub salt on his pork to make it juicier and more flavorful. When finished, the chief hands the pork on a stick to his daughter and asks her to have her dinner. Elena was very hungry. She only cared if it was animal meat. Despite the meat being a little burnt, Elena intensely begins to chew on the meat. The shaman notices that Elena eats meat just like her father. Elena mentally recalls walking through the desert in the heat and not eating for days before. Elena also drank all the water the chief had given her in a volley. The girl was glad that she had managed to eat properly lately. After dinner, all the orcs danced around the fire. Elena sat next to the orc children on the sidelines and decided to sing them a song. Elena lays down on her father's arm. The girl with her angelic voice starts singing a song about her beloved father. Strange yellow fireflies appear around the orcs. Elena looks at the golden balloons rising upwards. The girl's soul became warm and her body became lighter and more airy. The orcs bemusedly drew close to each other and sat sweetly by the fire. Recovering, Elena notices how the orcs listened intently to her singing. The girl compares her voice literally to that of an angel. The shaman was just as amazed by such marvelous singing. The orc believed that such singing could reanimate anyone with magical power. The orcs were amazed at how marvelous Elena's singing was, one of the orcs remarking that the other girls of their tribe sang like a howling boar dying. Many orcs cried at such singing, unable to contain themselves. The girl covers her face. She had completely forgotten that the text was in the language of his real world, but still he managed to change it to erotic. Elena calls her song Fatherly Love. The leader laughingly calls his daughter singing a beautiful sound to his ears. Helena has also subverted that the effect of her songs is over-amplified. The shaman, with a serious face, calls Helena's voice the voice of the angels. The shaman adds that ancient scriptures indicated that hundreds of years ago, protective angels had already descended to earth in times of war. The shaman puts his hand to his chin and remarks that the angels' songs were as powerful as their physical strength. Elena listens attentively to everything the shaman tells her about angels coming down from heaven. Elena still did not understand why the angel decided to leave him the body of a little girl dedicated to the flattery of the poor gods. Elena had previously chanted to all things higher and was a strong believer in a higher power. The shaman called the girls singing a miracle, calling Helena their angel who should sing another song for them. All the orcs support the shaman's decision, as everyone there enjoyed the girls singing. At one point, Elena decides to step aside to take a leak. Jay missed his old body. He was still unaccustomed to a woman's body. Elena decides to go deeper into the woods that no one will see her. Sitting down under one of the bushes, Elena is doing her needle through her tears. Running back to the village, Jay realizes that when his body grows up, he's going to have a lot more trouble. The next morning, Elena goes to the river to wash her face. With her head down, the girl observes her pretty face in the blue water. Elena decides to calm down and restrain her emotions further, but before that, to put her appearance in order. After washing her face and styling her hair, Elena sweetly tries to smile. Actively gesticulating and playing with her emotions, Elena gradually enters back into the role of the cute little girl. Eventually, the girl lightly begins to cry at the position she's really in. After wiping away her tears, Elena calms down. for she is a cute little girl with a weak body who can be blown away by even a normal wind. Helena is savvy enough to realize that she is so weak that the world is too dangerous for her, and without the skills of strength and magic, she cannot survive. Back in the village, Helena immediately decides to ask the shaman for help. Without too many questions, the shaman immediately agrees to teach the chief's daughter magical skills. Shaman asks to wait for him before the class begins. Yelena silently watches shaman going through ancient books in search of the right one. Once finished, the shaman takes the girl to the proper distance from the village to practice Elena's skills. The shaman begins by suggesting that the girl close her eyes and free her mind to feel the very energy around her. Elena covers her eyes tightly, adding that she is starting to feel that very energy. A large flow of energy formed around Elena. The girl could feel this blob of energy perfectly. Elena compared it to feeling like she was surrounded by a large number of warm things. The shaman concludes that the one has a slight build system and that this is a rare magical attribute in orcs. Elena adds that this attribute sounds really unique. In her thoughts, she remarks that he is an angel after all. Elena was not holding back her emotions, for everything she had done was not in vain. The shaman assumed that the mage who used the transformation technique on Elena was also a light mage. Elena wonders if she can only study light magic, or if there are other options. The shaman explains that this is just a high affinity for the light system, but she can learn other magical spells as well. The shaman talks about various magical attributes, but the effect of the others will be much less in contrast to the light. Elena starts dreaming about how she will learn all kinds of magic, and it won't be a problem for her. The shaman, without waiting for the girl, decides to demonstrate his greatness in the knowledge of magic. A huge fire sphere forms above the shaman's head. Gaiman casts the fire blast spell and throws the orb aside. Elena was momentarily shocked by such powerful magic. Elena was not less surprised by the fact that it was the first time she had seen a magic spell. The smoke made the girl cough immediately. Elena finds magic too cool. The girl wished she could try and practice her powers as well. Elena begins to concentrate all her power in her hand, as the shaman had done in front of her before. Yelena stared intently at her palm, but still nothing appeared in it. Elena was confused as to why it didn't work. After all, she had done everything the same. The shaman was no less confused because the girl had done everything right and had enough strength to activate this spell. Yelena examined her hands, swept her hands. It's God's body and magical affinity, but still powerless. The shaman begins to assume that the girl has a seal on her blocking her powers. Elena immediately goes to the shaman and asks that he remove all ancient contracts and seals from her. The shaman remarks that once the spell is activated, everything should go away. After the end of the spell, the shaman asks that the girl repeat the spell again. The shaman starts going through every possible spell, but Elena still couldn't activate a single one. Elena concludes that she is incapable of casting spells. The shaman suggests that all of this is for a reason, and there is a reason for it. Finding his daughter, the chief adds that he never relied on magic, but improved in strength. Elena suggests that she is too weak or simply not worthy of the holy power. With tears in her eyes, Elena begins to pound the ground in anger and bewilderment. Elena suggests that she needs to reconnect with the heavens and talk about it. Elena decides to postpone the connection with the angels and to give her weak body a little workout before doing so. Elena had noticed how martial the orcs were, and they could very well teach her something as well. After arriving deep in the forest, the girl approaches the orcs and asks them to borrow an axe. The orcs looked at the chief's daughter in bewilderment. Elena loudly proclaims that she wants to learn the fighting skills of the orcs. One of the orcs comes closer and remarks that the girl was too young to learn fighting skills. Elena takes the axe away, not wanting to listen to him. Elena starts trying to deal with the axe to show the rest of the orcs the other side. The orc who gave the axe to the girl still thought she shouldn't be doing it. Elena realized that the axe was too heavy for her. Elena could not understand why the axe was so heavy for her. Elena slowly begins to prepare herself to lift such a heavy axe. The girl begins to consider her actions and comes to the opinion that she should use physics to do so. With barely a lift of the axe, Elena begins to spin around with the axe. The girl continues to swing the axe with great speed. At one point, the axe slips out of the girl's hands and disappears completely. One of the orcs manages to crouch. The axe slams into a tree a centimeter above his head. Elena realizes that this is a complete failure and a non-duacha for her. Elena heads back to her house frustrated, for all the training was useless for her weak body. Sitting on the porch of the house, Elena speculates that the inability to use magic may be due to the girl's previous use of forbidden magic. Elena was mortified after all. Singing beautiful songs is one thing, but using magic is quite another. A crowd of orc girls walk stealthily over to the girl, beckoning Elena over to them. Puzzled, Elena wonders what the girls want from her. With lights in their eyes, the girls slowly headed towards Elena. In the moment, the orcs jump on Elena, wanting to give her a long hug. All the orcs surrounded little Elena and took turns starting to hug the innocent girl. The orcs were amazed at how cute and soft Elena looked. The girl couldn't keep putting up with it. The orcs remarked on how soft and truly smooth Elena's skin was, unlike the orcs. The girls continued to take turns squeezing Elena, something the girl could not tolerate. At one point, Elena starts calling for help as she was getting really hard. The chief, hearing the screams, decides to check on Elena and find out what is happening to his daughter. By evening, Elena's room was empty. The girl decides to put up a sign so that no one enters without asking. Lying on the bed, Elena noted that there were no newborn orcs in the tribe at all, assuming it was due to life in the desert. Elena's face was completely healed by the orcs. The girl didn't understand why the orcs were so crazy about the chieftain's daughter. Elena realizes that she cannot continue to live in the orc tribe, for she must go to the human city. Covering her face with the sheet, she realized that with the little girl's body, she wouldn't be able to get far. In the moment, Elena realizes that in the body of a little girl, he easily manages to talk to girls. Smiling wryly, Elena considered that her body wasn't so useless. From the side of the entrance to the room, the light of the moon is revealed. One of the orcs decided to check on the chieftain's daughter. Elena was confused as to who had come to see her. Covering herself with the bedspread, Elena tried to hide from her captor. Elena asked that she not be touched after all. She's just a little girl. Orchiha jumps into Elena's bed and asks to join her, because sleeping alone was too boring. Elena was startled by the orc's appearance. The girl wrapped her arms around Elena and lay down next to her. Elena didn't want to become someone else's pillow. Elena is once again convinced that she should leave as soon as possible and seek out the human world. The next morning, Elena struggles to get out of bed and heads for the exit of her room. Elena called the orc girls horrible, suggesting that next time it was the orc chieftain's place to come spend the night. Out in the assembly hall, Elena tries to find her father. Elena wondered where her father and all the guards standing near the throne had gone. In the moment, Elena notices an oddity near one of the walls of the chief's main hall. Elena observed a small hole in the corner that appeared to be newly dug for her. Numerous ideas began to enter Elena's head as to what exactly could have been in that dug hole. With enthusiasm, the girl decides to dig a hole and find out exactly what her father has been hiding from her. Breaking the hole a little, the girl observed a small cloth under which something was hidden. The girl realized that 2 unknown books were being found under the cloth. The first book lying on top looked more like an ordinary magazine for adults, which struck the girl hard. Elena didn't understand how a book from her real world could have fallen into her father's hands. Taking the book, Elena scrutinizes that one carefully. The girl couldn't believe that orcs could have such a thing. The girl also notices that there was also another book, a thicker one. Seeing what the cover depicted, Elena was even more interested in this book. Elena runs as hard as she can to her room to study both books. Elena flopped down on the bed and started reading and looking at all the pictures on the posters in the magazine. The girl noted that the orcs were not bad, but the human girls were much prettier. Elena also realizes that she has previously read this novel, and so she is quite bored with rereading it. In the moment, an idea pops into Elena's head as to how she can get out of the orc settlement. After a while, the chief returns home from a hunting trip. A girl sitting in the hall wonders where her father got these books. The chief came closer and took the books in his hands to answer the girl. A slightly panicked chief wonders where the girl was able to discover these books. Elena makes up the excuse that while cleaning, she accidentally found these books, adding that she is very curious to know where the books came from. Helena told me with admiration that the human girls are quite beautiful in this book. Orc, not knowing what to say, asks the girl to return the book because the girl was still small. Elena jumps down the steps and decides to show the book in question to the other orc girls to comb her in the same way. The chief gets excited, asking his daughter not to do it, because the other girls might not understand the book. The chief asks his daughter to be obedient and just give him the book. The chief is sweating profusely with worry. Elena decides to listen to her father and holds out the books to the man. With a sigh, the chief calls his daughter obedient. With a smirk, Elena still wondered how the chief had gotten this particular book from another world. An orc tells a story in which his tribe attacked a town where he found a book in a church. The mages from there often practiced magic and summoning from another world. Elena decides to try and put her plan into action and wonders why she was the one mentioned in the strange book. The chief doesn't quite understand what the girl is talking about in passing, clarifying how the girl knows such a strange language from a book. Elena, making it up as she goes along, declares that she is a savior from a distant desert and is destined to fight and destroy the devil. The chief was even more confused and looked at the strange book several more times. After that, yelled for the shaman himself to come to him as well. The shaman, with all his might, immediately rushed to the chief and inquired what had happened. The chief briefly told the shaman about the strange legend. Shane himself could not understand whether it could have been an ancient legend from a strange book. All the orcs also ran to the chieftain's call and tried to eavesdrop on what was going on inside. The shaman reminds her that the girl can't use magic, but the shaman was in agreement that they shouldn't hold her back with the tribe, because Elena needs to continue to evolve. Raising her head to the sky, Elena realized that she would finally be able to find the human world. All the orcs abruptly ran into the chieftain's hall and wondered if they could go with her and become the chosen ones. The orc girls were upset that Elena was leaving them, and they wouldn't see each other again. Elena decides to add her acting skills as well. The girl with the tearful face also did not want to leave the village. The shaman states that Elena has her own way, and staying here would be the worst decision for her. All the orcs were upset that Elena was leaving them. The chief is also supportive of his daughter, pointing out that she will often face challenges, and that is normal. Placing his hand on Helena's head, the chief asks that the girl be well prepared to leave, and in 3 days they will be ready to send her off. In the moment, and Elena herself gets really sad, because orcs are rude by nature, but they were unwilling to part with her. Still, the girl's decision was reinforced by the fact that she would finally be able to see real people. Elena wanted to see the human girls of this world, but the girl was still frustrated with the way she looked at the moment. The chief notices that Elena is crying and asks her not to be upset, because she will remain the daughter of the chief of the Lee clan. All 3 days were spent preparing, orcs trying to help in any way they could. On the day of departure, a group of orcs dealing with armor and weapons enter the chieftain's hall. One of the orcs provides an axe for self-defense and a little armor to keep the girl safe. The orcs slowly brought the girl into the hall and furnished her completely. Yelena was completely confused as to why a fragile girl would need all this. In the aftermath, Elena still thanks the orcs for their concern. The orcs add that they will be back when they find something more suitable for the girl. Elena was slowly beginning to understand the goodness of the orcs, but she still didn't understand how she could wear the armor in question. Eventually, the orcs tore down all the armor they could and didn't listen to Elena at all, that she didn't need it because of her small size. The girl suggests it would be better for them to move her bed in the future and use the space for storage. After examining her body, Elena realizes that it's been a long time since she's been in the human world, and it's been even longer since she's had a good bath, except when she rinsed in the cauldron a couple of days ago. Elena also points out that the angel's body gets dirty badly enough, but still as a human she needs to be clean. Elena decides to find the right trough to take a bath after all. Upon entering the storage room, the girl notices the very trough she so desperately needs. Elena struggled to drag the trough to the right place. The orc girls look questioningly at the girl's efforts. Pulling the trough to the right place, Elena realizes that now she needs to draw water. At this moment from behind comes a girl orc wondering if Elena plans to take a bath. The girl was very scared of that one. Startled, Elena falls and knocks over the trough she needs. The trough flips over and lays right on top of Elena's body. The girl barely greets the orc. Without any energy, the orc removes the trough from little Helena. Orc asks still just tell her when Elena decides to take a bath. The girl takes Elena in her arms and starts waving her around like a toy. Elena asks not to be touched and refuses the orc's help. A moment later, the orc, along with Elena, are sitting in the trough and taking a bath together. Elena was puzzled by such obsession on the part of the orc woman who had attacked her again and again. At night, when Elena was already in bed, a sharp female orc ran into the room and pounced on the girl. In the aftermath, the orc continued to stalk Elena until she had no more strength left. Elena turned to her father and complained that a female orc would attack her. The chief brushed it off and didn't know what to say to his daughter about it. Once again, the female orc takes Elena away and continues to play with her. The day of shipment has arrived. The chief calls to his daughter to come out to the square ready. Elena confirms that it's ready to ship. Elena called this time, the time of love. The chief doesn't understand why his daughter is unwilling to take at least a bag of important items. Not wanting to upset the chief, Elena nevertheless agrees to take a bag on the road, adding that she will have enough food and water for about a month. The bag contained more of the various useful things like provisions and amulets and money. The chief also offers to give his axe to his daughter to make it easier for her to cut open the skulls of her enemies. The chief also offers to give his daughter his axe to make it easier for her to cut open the skulls of her enemies. All the orcs gathered in the square and bade a chorus of farewells to the daughter of the village chief. Elena herself was amazed that absolutely every orc was saying goodbye to her. All the orcs continued to admonish the words to the little girl. At this point, Shaman asks if everything is ready for his daughter's departure. Shamat confirms the chief's words. Holding out an unknown scroll, the shaman explains that they must use it to send the girl to the outskirts. Yelena was a bit excited after all. This was the only scroll the Lee clan had, and they were willing to use on her, even though she had been lying all along. The chief asks the shaman if this teleportation is safe. The shaman declares that this scroll is more than safe, and the deviation from the right place does not exceed 100 meters. The chief adds that this is normal and more than acceptable. In her mind, Elena was already imagining how she would be hundreds of meters above the ground and just start flying downwards. The orc women were also concerned about the girl's departure. They bid Elena a friendly farewell. Elena, applying her acting skills as well, cries and says goodbye to the orcs. The chief asks Helena to hurry, for they should begin the rite of dispatch. Elena walks closer and stands across from her father. Elena declares that she is finally ready. The chief extends his hand to his daughter. The chief places his hand on the girl's head and reminds her that she will forever be the daughter of the chief of the Lee clan forever. All the orcs shouted words of encouragement in unison. The chieftain added that if the girl had a hard time, she could always come back and the chieftain would protect his little daughter. Tearfully, Elena agrees with her father's words. The chief asks the shaman to finally activate the teleportation scroll. The shaman asks all orcs to disperse before he activates an unknown scroll. The shaman pulls out a scroll and tries to use the one. A golden glow appears around the orc. At this moment, this glow also appears under Elena's feet, much to the girl's surprise. Lastly, the female orc shouts that she will not forget the daughter of the Lee clan, Elena. All the orcs cheer and repeatedly say goodbye to Elena. All were happy to see the girl. Elena still couldn't believe that absolutely every orc in this village admired her. Yelena shouts to the whole village that from today she is the daughter of the Lee clan forever, which causes a strong glow around her. The glow is levied upwards and begins to transport Elena's consciousness and body. At some point, the glow drops into an unknown forest and gradually begins to develop. Elena falls slightly from a short distance onto the thick grass. Picking up her head, the girl was confused as to why her head hurt after every teleportation. Looking around, Elena immediately notices that she's not in the desert at last, and apparently the teleportation magic really worked. Looking around, Elena realizes that she is not on the edge of the desert, but in a dense forest. The girl immediately removes her backpack to inspect her bag. There were a lot of amulets in the bag. Elena assumes they're what made the teleportation happen. Elena screamed to the whole forest that because of the amulet, she was in an unknown place and now she didn't know what to do. Elena is horrified to realize that the map won't help her get out of the wild woods either. Not knowing what to do in such a situation, Elena just lies down on the grass and decides to rest for a while. The girl wanted to think about how exactly she could return to humanity. It also bothered Elena that the grass in this forest was quite hard and prickly. She also noticed that the air in the forest was much lighter and the sun brighter. With certainty, the girl thought that this was definitely not a desert. Elena decides to relax and just have a little vacation, like a picnic. The girl starts dreaming about how to meet real people. Elena's stomach rumbled, and she decided to look for something to eat. The girl didn't want to waste the orc's meat supply right away. Elena recalls that she has an ability from her angel sister, and the song in question is healing, and has a strong affinity with nature. With a sinister face, Helena swept her eyes over the fact that she was about to have a nice dinner. Elena decides to try out her powers, and after coughing a few times, she steps into the light. Under the beams of light, the girl begins to perform a song she knows. From such angelic singing, many animals were attracted. Snow-white birds and other animals one by one fled to Helena's angelic singing. Elena stops in a moment and remarks that she's doing marvelously, and the animals have indeed flocked to the singing. Elena noticed that the birds were soaring carefree beside her, waiting for another angelic song. Putting up her palms, the girl wanted the birds to fly right into her hands so she could cook them on the fire. The girl looked at the approaching bird with a sparkle in her eyes. The animals, sensing something wrong, began to scatter sharply. In a second, all the animals quickly left Elena and the girl was once again left with nothing. Elena was furious that all the animals had figured it out so quickly and scattered. At one point, Elena hears a large number of horses approaching. The sound is strange to her. Elena realizes that before finding out who these unknowns are, she should follow up. An unknown crowd of men on horseback were walking along the road. One of the unknown bandits remarked that he had heard a strange sound, and his hearing had never failed him before. Elena was confused about where to hide. The girl decides to hide behind the first tree she meets and find out who the unknown men are. Valiant knights or robbers. Elena decides to look into people's souls and find out more accurate information about them. Elena applies a spell of recognition on the first unknown male leading all the others. The girl learns that the leader of all the bandits is called Piglet Fett. Elena laughed hard that the gang leader's name was Piglet Fett, noting the man's rugged appearance and the ridiculousness of his name. Elena also decides to look into Fett's memories as well. Fett notices the man's scowling face in the darkness. The man had previously been involved in the slave trade and had repeatedly robbed the lives of innocent people. Elena realizes with horror that these are not valiant knights, but the very real slave traders. The girl decides to run deep into the forest because if she is caught, the situation will be dire. After snagging one of the bushes, the outlaw immediately notices that they hear something nearby, and they should immediately find the source of the sound. Elena realizes that it's pointless for her to run, because the location has already been discovered. Elena starts going through her options of who she should introduce herself as when she first meets her. Elena decides to step into the role of an innocent girl and take the first step towards the unknown. Elena abruptly ran out of the bushes towards them and asked the slave traders to stop. The men were surprised by this encounter. The girl holds out a handful of amulets with a smile and offers to take them to the man, for the amulets have been blessed by angels. Elena at one point suggests that she ran out too suddenly to meet the slave traders. The ringleader silently continued to stare at the innocent girl. Elena Soap continued to laugh. In her mind, she didn't understand why the man was looking at her like that. After all, she wasn't that beautiful. A slightly panicked Elena tries to calm herself down. After all, she's doing the right thing. The man abruptly gets down from his horse and asks the others to look all around the forest for any other people. Different thoughts come into Elena's head. The girl assumed that the man wants to kill her right now. The man smirked, asking Elena if amulets protect against evil spirits. The man looks into the girl's small hands and scrutinizes the very amulets. Gradually, Elena begins to realize that it wasn't a good idea to go straight out to the slave traders because he was really attractive. But Elena also realized that the man would still be able to catch her because he was better at navigating the forest. The man takes Elena by the shoulder and explains that he has no money at the moment and they should drive to the nearest town. Elena wasn't too pleased that the man was taking her so roughly by the shoulder. The only thing stopping the girl from escaping was that if she did anything about it, the slave trader would simply use force on her. The man also adds that she should give them a discount on amulets as a reward for going to town. Helena was annoyed by the man's company, noting that the man was insatiable. After placing Helena on the wagon, the men mount their horses and head towards the city. With a smirk, Elena realized in her mind that the man would definitely fall for her and be able to get out of this situation. The men surrounded the carriage and watched the girl closely. Elena knew immediately that the tentative plan had been reached and she was heading to the city of men. Now all she had to do was wait for the opportune moment. Sighing, Elena was a little annoyed that she was surrounded on all sides by slave traders. After all, it made her plan more complicated. The man looked at the girl from time to time. Elena didn't understand what he saw in her. Looking around, Elena notices a dagger sticking out of her bag. The girl assumed that the slave trader leader liked her dagger. Unable to think of anything better, Elena offers to buy the man a dagger for only 10 silver coins. With a smile, the man states that he is not interested and she can keep the dagger. The man continues on toward the city. For such a long trip, Elena could no longer sit on the hardboards. The girl's little body was all sore from such a trip. In the moment, Elena notices a gateway to a huge and incredibly beautiful city. The carriage with the slave traders is gradually approaching the entrance. The knight at the entrance does not immediately let the slave trader ringleader through and demands his identification. The man pulls a small scroll with a strange symbol from his bag. Without further question, the knight waves off and lets the man's horses pass, much to Helena's interest. Elena also notices slaves in chains passing nearby. Helena also notices that each of the slaves had the same symbol as the man's document. Elena realized it was much more serious than that and she could be in trouble. Elena felt that she urgently needed to look for a way out, because she could not be branded on her shoulder and become a slave. Elena decides to run a recon on all the people to look for the right one. After a long search, Elena could only find the usual employees and no more. Elena realizes that in the city it will be difficult for her to find salvation among ordinary villagers. In the moment, Elena hears the rumble of approaching cavalry. The girl notices a red-haired girl in armor. After scanning the knight, she realizes that this girl may be her only salvation. The girl decides to get her attention because the knight was one of the strongest in the city. Elena looked at the knight with a sparkle in her eyes and contemplated an escape plan. Elena decides to pretend to fall to the ground in an attempt to call out to the knight. Elena falls to her knees in front of the girl. The whole convoy, including the girl herself, stops abruptly. The girl knight turns her attention to little Helena. The slave trader was angry at Helena's actions and reluctantly got down from his horse. The man carelessly picks up the little girl and apologizes for the child's rudeness, noting that she likes to lie. At the moment, Elena starts crying hard. The girl was worried that her body was too weak and she was unable to stand up for herself. The slave trader was in the extreme annoyed by the girl's behavior. Elena once again asked the knight to help her, explaining that the slave trader was trying to make a slave out of her and sell her to an unknown old man. The girl continued to silently observe what was happening. The laborer begins to cough carelessly at this statement. The man apologizes repeatedly for his companion's rudeness and asks to leave their conversation first. Elena was fully confident that the girl would not leave the little girl in trouble and would help her. Another plan arises in Elena's mind, which she decides to implement immediately. Elena begins scanning the knight's memories and watches as she cuts through one after another of the enemy knights without regret. The knights continued to fall one by one in hellish agony with no chance of victory. Elena felt uneasy at what she saw, for there were rivers of blood all around the girl. Elena looked around and tried to think of what she should say next. Elena decides to try to use from the knight's memory. Elena begins to blame the gang for the acts committed. At one point, Elena pretends to lose her voice. Elena realizes that if she can't speak sharply, the knight might think the slave trader is using magic. Elena convincingly continued to play the role of a defenseless girl who lost her voice unexpectedly. The knight asks the girl if she really knows her. The girl demands that the slave trader dispel the silence spell immediately. The man waving his arms around tries to explain that he can't physically wield a high-level spell. One of the knights points his spear at the man's throat. The man demanded that the slave trader release the girl immediately because they had already abused the child. All the knights slowly begin to approach the slave trader, wanting the man to answer for his deeds. A crowd of gawkers also decides to join in and sharply began to blame the slave traders for what happened, chasing those away. The girl states that she did not expect to see such high-level magic from a mere slave trader. She demanded that the man release the girl immediately. The knights laughingly wonder if the slave traders are willing to fight their leader in exchange for the girl. Applying her spell, Elena made sure that all of the girl's knights were high-level fighters. The laborer reminds us that knights cannot interfere in the affairs of the association. Elena continued to hold on to her throat. Sally decided to clarify where the tag was located with the slave in question. The man was confused, for he realized that the girl had not yet been branded a slave. One of the knights remarks that the girl spoke in their accent and could not be a slave. The man demands that he raise his left hand and show the seal. The slave trader was utterly bewildered by this. Still agreeing, the slave trader decides to examine the girl's left arm. The man carelessly opens one of the girl's clothing items. The man makes sure she doesn't have the slave tag. Elena was outraged that the man had ruined her clothes. Sally places her sword on the slave trader's shoulder and demands an explanation of where he got the child in question. The man explains that without the branding, it means she is not a child. Sally makes one last demand of the man, to let the child go. The girl's sword was already in the slave trader's face. The man carelessly lets go of the girl. Helena falls sharply to the ground. With a clatter, Elena's frail body falls to the ground. The man states lastly that the knights were definitely wrong, and now the Chamber of Commerce Association will not let them out of their sight. All the slave traders abruptly hide behind the nearest alley. Helena strokes her head after the fall and was still glad she only made do with a minor bruise. Helena was glad that she had been able to get rid of the nasty man and would now be able to meet Sally. Sally, sitting on horseback, demands that the girl stop lying to her, for she realized that there was no spell. Helena looked around confused, for the girl had easily revealed her plan. Sally puts the little girl on her horse and continues her ride, accompanied by the knights. The other knights obediently continued to follow their knight. Elena was confused to find out that Sally had understood everything from the beginning. Lowering her head, Elena still consoled herself that she was past the danger and nothing bad was likely to happen to her. Helena looked at Sally sitting behind her. Sally silently continued to ride her horse. Elena was confused as to what this girl would decide to do with her next. Elena pondered the outcome if she hadn't met her sister, because then the girl would have been badly hurt. After traveling a bit through the city, the entire cavalry stops near a luxurious palace. Sally climbs down from her horse and helps Helena down as well. All the knights, including Helena, were slowly heading towards the entrance of the palace. At that moment, an unknown knight rushed out of the palace. The man was trying to address Captain Sully with an urgent message. With a bloodied face, the man reached for the girl, frowning at the threshold of the entrance. Sally announces that they have an intruder and the rest of us should be careful. All the knights bared their swords and prepared for a serious battle. One of Sully's men ran up to the wounded man and began to help his co-worker. Sully and Elena continued toward the hall. The knights couldn't understand what had happened to the man, or who could have done this. Elena was no less confused by what was happening. Elena decides to use her power of detection. Elena learns that the knight was Tommy Clayton with some pretty impressive physical and magical skills. Elena was interested in the fact that the knight was not in critical health, and his vitals were on the high side. The girl thought that was strange. Sally assumes it's her old man again, so decides to check on her. Sally demands that all knights stay at the entrance and do not approach until she orders it. The knights were reminded that the mansion was occupied by the Duke's enemies. Sally screamingly demands that the knights do nothing until she gives the order. Sally continues to move towards the mansion. The knights obediently stayed behind. Elena in turn assumed that this was the perfect moment for her to escape. Elena tiptoed slowly and started to walk away. But Sally noticed it immediately and decided to take her with her. Sally takes Elena under her arm and heads to the mansion. Elena was very scared because it is very dangerous there. The girl asks her not to worry because she is close by. Helena continued to yell and make many excuses not to go with her. Sally continued to walk through the mansion without further ado. At one point, Sally remarks that it's quiet for such an attack. After her words, many different arrows immediately flew towards them. Sally, along with Elena, easily dodge all the arrows. Elena was terrified of what was happening. Sally decides to hold Helena tighter against her so she won't get hurt. Sally continues to head down the long hallway of the mansion. Sally hears another more suspicious sound. Sally nimbly manages to dodge all the arrows falling from the ceiling. Sally continued to sidestep every trap and stave off absolutely every arrow. Elena was in the extreme of fright. Her whole face was tearful and terrified to the point of fright. Sally slowly approached the end of the hallway. At one point, Sally steps on a stove, which sets off a chain of different sounds. The mechanism opens the cliff beneath Sally's feet, and the girl promptly began to fall downward. Elena couldn't have expected it, and neither could Sally. Falling into an unknown room on top of the girls, a bucket with unknown contents also spilled out. Looking around, Sally assumed it was flour and water. She realized at once that it was her grandfather's handiwork. Sally yelled loudly for the old man to get away from them. Behind a screen not far from Sally stood an old man laughing at his granddaughter. The girl looked at her irritably. With anger, Sally punches through the shirk with one punch and observes her grandfather laughing. The man tearfully asks his granddaughter to calm down, because it was just a prank. Sally planned to teach her old man a lesson for such jokes. At this point, Elena continued to sit in the gooey dough and tried to apply detection on the old man. The girl recognized that this was no ordinary old man, but a rather capable mage with high physical strength. At that moment, a woman's voice sounded from the direction of the stairs. The girl asked Sally not to do that. Sally turned her head sharply toward the unknown woman. The girl slowly made her way down the stairs and reminded them that it was their grandfather after all. Sally continued to sit on top of the old man and hold him by his clothes. Alice comes closer and guffaws at the incident. Sally was still angry at her old man's actions. Elena spotted the unknown girl and took notice of Alice's beauty. Sally gets up and walks away with the words that she will let the old man go this time. Alice calls her sister kind with a smile. Alice turns her attention to Helena and wonders what kind of child she is. Sally explains that the girl has important information for them. Alice comes closer and helps wipe Helena's face, noting that Sally is too kind. Elena couldn't take her eyes off of Alice's beauty and continued to examine the other one. Saliva flowed from Elena's mouth at the moment. She couldn't contain her emotions. Alice smilingly calls Elena a sick child since she can only drool. Sally asks Elena to stop deceiving her sister, pointing out that the girl is not as simple as she seems. Sally leaves to get cleaned up and asks Alice to watch the girl. Alice decides to take Elena for herself while Sally gets busy. Elena was fine with everything that was happening to her. She wished she could take a bath with her new sisters. Elena began to imagine taking a bath with her sister Alice. Sally steps aside and stops in a moment. Sally wonders if there is anything to say to Helena before she leaves. The girls decide to escort Elena to the negotiating room and discuss everything with the girl. Elena wasn't thrilled with Sally's stern face, but still agrees to her proposal. Slowly, everyone walks into the hall and seats themselves around the table. Everyone was gathered, including the old man himself. Elena decided to start her story. Elena tells how she got caught in an orc camp and magically managed to make an escape, and then managed to meet a group of slave traders. Elena also added confusedly that she had managed to steal a few things from the orcs for the journey. With a tearful face, Elena added that she had learned Sully's name from the orcs, and it was because of Captain Sully that she had been able to escape from the slave traders. Alice felt sorry for the little girl, but she also worried about why the orcs didn't eat Elena right away. Elena explains that it could have been precisely because of her wonderfully angelic voice. The old man decides to add that orcs don't know about the beauty of a voice. Elena states that her voice was confirmed by the chiefs themselves, and that is why she became popular in the village. The old man, interested, decides to ask the girl to perform one song for them to demonstrate. Elena agrees to sing because Captain Sally saved her, and it's the only thing she can do. Helena starts singing one of the old world songs she knows. Alice was struck by such an angelic voice. Alice comes closer and hugs the little girl, calling her singing angelic. The old man also noted with a smile how beautiful Elena's singing was. Sally in turn smiled silently. Elena was very glad that Alice kept hugging her. She was ready to snuggle up to her sister for days on end. Elena added that before that she had managed to meet kind people and spend the night at their homes. Elena also added that most of the time she slept under a tree. The old man decides to inquire about what the girl lived on and where she took her income from. With tears, Elena explained that she had tried to sell her amulets for cheap, but she still had to starve often. The old man decides to leave Elena at his mansion for a while. Alice was also touched by the little girl's story. The old man adds that they won't be able to pay Helena until they resolve the Chamber of Commerce issue. Elena immediately agrees, because she wanted to continue spending time with her sisters. The old man comes to the conclusion that it is because of the singing that the ward is so eager to get Helena, for she could be sold quite dearly. Elena adds that she was told by a slave trader that if she misbehaved, she would be sold to an old man. Sally was furious at what she heard, for it was her grandfather who was being talked about. The old man declares that he knows nothing about it. Sally grinningly reminds her old man that the 3-month-old patrol is understaffed still. The old man, not wanting to anger his granddaughter further, agrees to do everything on time. Alice asks her sister to remind her exactly how people who decide to purchase slaves in their town are punished. The old man sighs, realizing what his granddaughter is implying. The girls ask their grandfather to solve all the problems soon. The man agrees with them and asks them not to worry. Elena couldn't be happy that she was now heading to the bathroom with her 2 sisters. Elena continued to look at Alice with a loving gaze. There was a maid standing at the entrance. The girls asked to prepare everything for them in the bathroom, as well as towels for the baby. The maid agreed without further ado and left. Alice wondered what the girl's previous personality had been like. She also noted how luxurious Elena's previous clothes had been. Elena explains that she is actually an orphan, but she had a magic teacher, but he soon left her, and she continued to wander alone. Alice decides to believe the girl's story and offers to become a maid in their mansion, but without pay. Elena was ready for any conditions, just to stay. Elena, with teary eyes, still decided to ask for some funds for small expenses. With a laugh, Alice repeats that she will have to do a good job and they can pay Helena in gratitude. Elena assumes that Alice is still checking her identity, suspecting that she is not an ordinary orphan but from a serious family. After making their way to the bathroom, the girls begin to take off all their armor and dresses. One of the maids helps Alice remove her luxurious clothes. Elena watches intently and can't look away. Sally gets completely naked at one point, which has Elena very excited. The girl gradually sheds the rest of her armor and stands across from Elena. Sally also removes her mask from her face and hands it to a servant. The girl shifts her gaze toward Elena, which has her even more excited. Sally was not bothered in the least by Helena's presence, for she considered her only a small child. Elena couldn't take her eyes off of Sally. Her appreciation of everything that was going on was off the charts. Sally turns her attention to Helena and doesn't understand why she also doesn't undress for the bath. Alice comes closer and wonders with a smile what's going on with that one. At one point, such cuteness simply makes Elena faint. The girls did not understand what had happened to the child, for she suddenly fell into unconsciousness. Sally thinks that they should take care of the girl's physical training. Helena faintly smiled at the whole experience. She still couldn't believe that she was surrounded by two beautiful sisters. Elena is lying unconscious in the bathtub. The girls were amazed at this reaction. Alice decides to let Elena rest, as the girl was too fragile and helpless. The next morning, Elena was already lying on the bed in the luxurious bedroom. Alice had changed the girl into her pajamas. At one point, Alice called out for Elena to wake up, but the girl just turned away and asked for a few more minutes. Alice stood over the girl and called out to Helena repeatedly. The girl slowly opened her eyes. Elena was amazed to find herself in a woman's bedroom. Jumping up, the first thing Elena stated was that she didn't want to bathe. Alice, sitting next to her, tries to pull Elena away. The girl doesn't understand how she ended up in the bedroom. Elena decides to check with Alice sitting next to her about what happened to her. Alice explains that Elena passed out in the bathroom. The girl was worried about Elena's condition and whether she was all right. Elena recalls those moments when Alice was standing next to her in the bathroom. Elena mentally resented the fact that she had missed all the fun precisely because of her weak body. Elena decides laughingly to clarify if she still needs to wash, because she was too dirty. Alice explains with a smile that they had already washed the girl, noting how smooth her skin was. Lena gets plans in her head, and decides to ask her older sister if she knows Sai Wei. Alice was interested. Why did Elena bring up such a rare race? Sally didn't understand at all who the Saviravi were. With a laugh, Alice explains that they are a strange humanoid race in Southland. Alice calmly tells us exactly how humanoids determine their gender, namely by physical contact. Elena tries to explain to her little sister that she is from this particular race, and when Alice hugged her, she transformed. Alice and Sally looked questioningly at Elena. They didn't understand what the girl was getting at. Elena adds that if it somehow harms the girls, she is ready to take full responsibility for her actions. Sally still didn't understand why the girl had decided to tell them that. Alice put her hands on Elena and tried to comfort the little girl. Alice jokingly decided to wonder if Elena was ready to spend the rest of her life with them. Elena didn't understand what Alice was getting at. Sally was outraged at such a statement from her older sister. Alice laughed loudly and added that when she bathed Helena, she made sure she was a lovely girl. Alice decides to tell a little bit about her younger sister as well. Namely that she has always been a kid and strived to be the strongest. Sally was furious that her sister was telling everything about her. Alice also pointed out that the girl passed out exactly when she was completely naked, calling Helena a little pervert. Alice takes the girl's hand and accompanies her. Elena obediently agrees with her older sister. The girls go out into the hall where they constantly congregate. Walking down the hall, Elena decides to turn to her older sister. Elena wondered with a smile if Alice would marry her if by some miracle she could become a man. Alice smiled at the girl's question. Sally was also interested in the proposal. Alice, covering her mouth with laughter, agrees to the little girl's offer. Taking Elena's cheek gently, she agrees to all her requests. Elena was just as glad that her older sister had agreed to this. As she continued walking down the hall, Elena was also curious as to how her old friend was doing, and if he was all right in heaven. Tearfully, Elena realized that heaven wasn't going to shine on him soon enough. A bell rang loudly in the street outside the mansion. Everyone was demanded to assemble immediately. Alice once again accompanied her little sister to the battlefield. Alice asked to take care of herself, Sally blessing her as a goddess. Sally silently bowed and got on her white horse and rode off with the rest of the army. Alice added in farewell that her sister's main thing was not to hurt herself. Sally walked silently out of the gate with the rest of the knights. Elena had been silently watching and seeing Sally off the whole time. Sally and the other knights immediately advanced to the task at hand. Alice explains that they should go and pray for Sally afterward, and so Helena goes with them. In her mind, Elena didn't much want to pray for a narrow-minded petty god. Elena also recalled that a god could also transform into an ordinary sphere. That made the girl laugh a lot. Alice didn't quite understand why Elena was laughing. Alice takes that one by the cheek with a smile and pulls her along. Elena didn't want to go pray to any deities at all. Coming to the statue, the maids and Alice herself stood before it and began to pray. Alice recited holy words to protect all her loved ones from impending troubles and everything else. Elena was momentarily interested in who exactly was depicted on the statue. Elena realizes that Alice is praying to the very angel Gabriel is praying to. Alice sternly explains that Elena shouldn't call the deities by their names because that's not their custom. Elena adds that she's a little surprised that Alice is praying to this particular goddess, since she's not sure Gabriel can give the desired effect. Alice explains to little Helena that to say such a thing is blasphemy. Alice explains that their family has always believed in this particular god over the years, calling Gabriel the guardian of life and war. Elena forcefully says that she understands Alice. In thought, the girl was interested in what Alice said about Gabriel being the guardian of strength and war. Elena realizes that it was Gabriel's abilities that got to her, and that's why she won't be able to get her body back for a long time. Alice was also angered that the girl was constantly distracted from praying. Elena apologizes for her behavior, explaining that she was interested in her sister Sally's quarrel. Alice explained that Sally had gone on a mission to deal with a group of thieves called Stormwind, made up of elite bandits. Alice was also surprised that the statue began to emit a strange glow. Alice suggests they call it a day and move back to the mansion for breakfast. Elena is interested in the angel statue and decides to use the power of detection. Elena was slightly surprised by the effect of her ability after activation. The statue wondered to the little girl why she had disturbed it. Elena was amazed that the statue started talking to her. Alice didn't understand what the girl was talking about, because the room was absolutely silent. It seemed increasingly strange to Alice, a child experiencing auditory hallucinations at such a young age. Elena decides to wonder if her older sister knows about the dark demon. Alice told all she knew about the so-called demons, and that for the most part they were specifically fallen or black angels. Alice didn't understand why the girl had decided to ask her that. Elena, examining the statue, explains that she just read about it in an ancient book. Elena assumes it's a statue of a bad woman with the devil's weapon sealed in her, and that's why the spirit was talking to her. The spirit declares that people are too weak, and for that they will bear their sin. Elena adds that neither are noble angels, and so they won't touch the magic sword. The spirit just won't leave the girl. The sword immediately tries to justify itself, and asks to be taken away after all by going over all the positive qualities of the sword. Elena, tired of listening to a chatty spirit, decides to just leave. Sword is still trying to restrain the girl and asks the girl to come back. Elin reminds her that it's time for breakfast. The girl doesn't listen to the old sword and agrees with her sister and goes after her. Alice and Elena arrive at the room where everything was already set up for the girls. There were various kinds of food on the table. The girls' eyes were dazzled by the wide variety of food. Alice laughingly tells Elena to feel free to eat whatever she wants. Alice slides the plate over and wonders what the food is. Elena immediately names the dish. Alice decides to check again and points to a more refined dish. With drool on her mouth, the girl couldn't resist the beauty of each dish. Alice wondered how the little girl knew so much about food. Alice asks to finish Elena, and afterward she planned to bring the girl home. Elena wasn't quite sure which house her older sister was referring to. Elena didn't understand whose house her older sister was talking about. Alice adds that she will take the girl to her house, because Elena is probably already looking for her real family. Elena still didn't understand what Alice was saying. Alice explains that their family doesn't eat greasy food for breakfast, and so she specifically ordered everything for Elena. Alice also wondered how an orphan could have more than 100 silver in her bag. The girl also noted the girl's soft and smooth skin, not fitting the description of an orphan. Alice also had a question as to how the orphan was versed in such exquisite dishes that she had never seen. Elena realizes things aren't going well for her, and she should figure out how to trick Alice. Alice smilingly asks the girl to open her mouth so she can feed Elena. Elena decides to agree and lets herself be fed from a spoon. Alice gradually cuts off pieces of cake and helps Elena to eat, wondering what her background is. Alice conspired to keep cutting and shoving a piece into Elena every second. The girl also wondered what castle the girl had come from. Helena was having a hard time chewing over everything Alice was giving her, didn't understand which family the girl was talking about now. Alice held out another spoonful of dessert. She wanted to know also why Elena had decided to run away from home. All Elena cared about was that Elois kept feeding her and shoving spoonful after another. Elena swallows another spoonful of cake with difficulty. Alice cuts off another slice and waits with a smile for a logical answer to her questions. Elena starts sniffling her nose slightly. At one point, Elena burst into loud tears, much to Alice's amazement. The girl confusedly asks Helena to forget her words. noting that she was pushing the girl hard. Elena wiped away her tears, pretending to have a hard time remembering her family. Elena says her family faced a sandstorm in which she was the only one to survive. Alice immediately apologizes to Helena, and henceforth added that she won't ask any more questions about it. Elena smiled through her tears, for Alice had made it possible for her to live in such prosperous circumstances. Elena realized that her carefree time with the two beautiful girls was coming to an end and she should move on. Alice adds that she didn't plan to kick the girl out if she had nowhere else to go. Elena was slightly surprised, for she had thought her older sister wanted to give her away somewhere. Alice explained her worry by saying that her family might be somewhere, worried about the little girl missing, and the poor mother's heart might be broken. Elena asks not to blame herself for Elsie, because she is the one who hid the terrible truth from her older sister. Alice beckons the maid over and asks her to bring them some tea. The maid slowly pours the tea into glasses and brings them to the girls. At the moment when Alice and Elena were drinking their tea, the girl notices a blue glow outside. Elena turned around and looked closely at the glow. Alice went with the girl to the window and explained that a portal had been activated in the courtyard, through which Sally was to return. Alice reaches out to Elena and offers to meet their sister together. The girls approach the entrance waiting for Sally, who has come in from her mission. Alice greets her sister at once. Sally walks silently towards her. You could tell by the look on her face that she was not in the mood. Sally silently walks by. Alice realizes that something terrible has happened on the mission that the girl doesn't want to talk about. Stopping back, Sally adds that this time a group of wind thieves were able to overpower them and battle the village. Alice was stunned at such words. Sally stares silently at the end of the hall. The girl remembered how mountains of corpses of village people lay in front of her. Sally talks about what she saw there and also about getting there in time to help. Many residents were killed while still young, which shook Sally badly at the time. The girl also added that their troops also suffered losses in the form of 3 knights. Alice declares that they shouldn't put off their plan of destruction any longer and offers to go with her sister next time. Sally agrees with her older sister's decision. At that moment, the maid brings Sally up to her oogie. Sally thanks the maid for her work and walks off in the direction of her room. Elena was just as shocked by what she had heard. Elena wonders to her sister if Sally will be okay. Alice explains that her sister is a true warrior and she can handle such a loss. Elena decides at this point to ask for a blessing from the Black Angel for the next crusade. At that moment, a maid walks past Elise with Sally's dinner. Elena asks if the dinner is for her sister. The maid nods approvingly. Elena asks to be allowed to take the food to her. The maid doesn't know what to say to such an offer. Alice is nearby and asks the maid to listen to the girl and let her take her dinner. The maid obediently hands dinner to the girl. Elena struggles to take the tray in both hands. The girl decides to take the tray quickly and heads towards Sally's room in a hurry. At one point, Elena trips over a threshold. Elena doesn't immediately realize what's happening and promptly starts flying downward. Elena drops the tray completely and then falls to the ground herself. All through dinner, Sally turns out to be on the floor, as does Elena herself. Elena was quite upset, for she had wanted to bring her sister's dinner herself. It was already dark outside the window, the day was coming to an end. The maid, having prepared another dinner, gives it to the girl and asks her to be more careful. Elena apologized for what happened, thankful that the girl was able to make another portion. The maid accepts the apology and tells Helena not to worry about it. Helena, holding the tray, walks closer to the door and tells Sally that she will be coming in now. Not hearing a response from her sister, Elena decides to knock on the girl's room as well. Elena doesn't hear a single word in response. It seems to the girl that Sally just wants to play with her, and that's why she doesn't react to her in any way. Elena still didn't hear a single word in response, which made her a little wary. Helena reiterates that she'll be right in and asks the girl not to worry. Elena opens the door with one hand while trying to balance and not drop another of Sally's dinners. At this moment, Sally was sitting on the couch and kept rubbing her sword. The girl's face was quite sad after today's incident. Coming closer, Elena asks her sister for some food, then holds out a plate to her. Helena notices the girl and realizes that Helena herself brought dinner to her. The girl explains that she lost 3 of her best soldiers in battle today. Elena asks if they were the same knights who took part in the old man's pranks. The girl confirms Helena's words, adding that the younger Tommy was brutally murdered by losing his head. Sally puts down her sword and takes the tray with her dinner from Helena. The girl asks her sister to be more careful. Sally wonders if Helena came specifically because she wants to comfort her. Sally adds that she shouldn't worry, as she's fine. Sally, lightly letting a tear escape her eyes, thinks that a true warrior should not fall into the trap of being sad and upset. Helena didn't know how to help the girl, noting that Sally was still a girl, and nothing could calm her down. Clenching her small fists, Elena realized that she was powerless here. Elena moves closer and watches as Sally covers her eyes with her hand. Elena puts her hand on top and watches the girl. Elena decides to sing a song for her sister to drown out her grief. Sally is momentarily distracted and takes to listening intently to Elena's singing. Sally manages to distract herself a little and even gets a smile on her face. Helena continued to sing, much to Sally's delight. The girl's singing gradually passed throughout the room, enveloping the entire room with an unknown magical energy. The knight standing near Sally's window similarly marveled at Helena's angelic singing. At some point, the singing reached Elisa, which she noticed. Elena and Sally sat on the couch and continued to look up at the night sky. In the moment, Alice walks into the room and remarks on how angelic Elena's voice is. Elena and Sally were quite startled by Alice's unexpected arrival. The girl immediately came over to Elena and began to hug her. She was enthralled by the way the girl sang. Alice added that if Helena does become a man, this world will lose a great beauty. Alice also asked her sister to hang in there too, as this condition will soon pass from her. Elena couldn't stop marveling at her situation. Sally silently continued to sit on the edge of the couch and stare up at the night sky. Alice remarks that Helena has been cheering the girl up and asks her to stop being sad for the sake of their parents. At points, Elena grows tired of being in the arms of her older sister. Helena comes closer and tells Sally not to be discouraged, as she and her sister Alice believe she can handle the bandits. At one point, Sally stops being sad and even smiles back at Elena. Sally remarks that she really can't resist Elena's luminous power. In a moment, there was a scream in the streets, an old man calling for his granddaughters. Alice walks over to the window and explains to the old man that they are in Sally's room. The old man extends his hand and announces an urgent message from the Pope of the Holy City. In the old man's hand was an unknown envelope. Helena and Sally didn't realize what kind of daddy brought them a letter. It was quite dark outside, and so the girls did not realize what such a strange letter could have been sent to them. Alice decides to activate the seal with a few magic words. The letter rises sharply into the air and begins to float. After the spell was spoken, the seal began to disintegrate right on the envelope, and the letter itself was covered in a strong light. It was getting too hard for Elena to see what was happening because of the strong light. The letter gradually began to unfold and disintegrate into many small sheets. All the sheets flew straight into Alice's hands after completion, and the girl began to read. From the letter, the girl learns that a messenger of the kingdom of the gods, the son of a saint, has arrived in their world. Elena immediately begins to realize that her old friend has finally arrived in her world. Helena was puzzled by the arrival of the holy brother. Alice tells how great the saint was, recounting all the recent exploits of that one. Sally also recalls that the saint was able to help the elves repel the thieves a few days ago. The old man explains that they should also, like the other lords of all castles, pay their respects and discuss important matters with the saint. Elena also noted how much her Drew had managed to accomplish in such a short period of time. The old man setting up his chair thinks this trip will be too difficult for her and asks Alice to go instead. The old man decides at this point to just rest while Alice resolves the issues. Alice agrees with her grandfather's decision. As she helps him stretch his back, she realizes the greatness of her old man. The old man adds that he and Sally will take care of the town while Alice is in meetings. With a smile, Alice adds that she is going to take Sally on the trip as well. The old man jumped up sharply from his chair. He didn't understand how he would guard the castle alone. Alice decides to finish off her old man and recalls a recent incident at the tavern involving an unknown elderly gentleman. The old man becomes greatly frightened, for he understood what his granddaughter was leading to. Alice leaves the man no choice but to ask him to take care of the village while they are away. Without further ado, the man agrees with the girl's decision and declares that he will definitely find this old man and get justice. Alice also demands that he keep an eye on little Helena and that she doesn't pick up any bad habits in their absence. Scratching his bald head, the old man assures his granddaughter that everything will be fine and he will take care of the little girl. Elena grinned at the old man. It's really fun to play with him. Sally decides to ask Alice to stay and take care of the needy after all. Alice immediately takes her sister's hand. Alice puts her hand on Sally's face and tells her not to worry about it. Alice reminds him that the Wind Bandits are now seriously injured and they may well be off Z-Town for a while to see the Holy Sun. Sally decides to go along with her older sister's decision. Elena was stunned that both girls were going to leave and leave her alone. Elena realizes that she should go with her sisters because his friend is still a heartbreaker, and the guy will take both her older and younger sister. Elena dramatically states that she will also be traveling with her sisters. The girls didn't understand why Elena reacted so harshly to this. Alice looked questioningly at Helena and waited for her to explain. The girl came closer and sat on Elena's level. She forgave the girl, so not joking, adding that they would be sure to bring the girl many different goodies. Helena was adamant. She reiterated that she was obliged to go with them to the saint. Alice thought Elena was crazy to play a prank on them like that. Elena is trying to make up a reason on the fly as to why she should be the one to go with them. Elena loudly declares that she will be the bride of the Holy Son of Light and asks that her husband not be taken from her. Sally looked questioningly at the girl, noting that she hadn't even had such a thought. Alice and the old man stepped closer, curious as to why exactly she was the saint's bride. Alice tried to understand whether what the little girl said is true. Elena couldn't think of more and just decided to remain silent. Sally covered her face and couldn't take it. Alice laughed hard at Elena's statement, but she still agreed to take the girl with her. Alice takes Helena's cheek and adds that she didn't expect her to be in love with a saint. Elena noted in her mind that it wasn't really that, but just an excuse to go with them. Alice decides to be along with Sally chaperoning the young princess. In her mind, Elena pictured her friend. At the moment, Elena nearly threw up from all the saints' introductions. Alice suggests that her sister start preparing to leave. The old man didn't understand why Elena suddenly felt so bad. Elena realized that she couldn't face her longtime friend like this, for it was a horrible body. The girl was already imagining the saint mocking the way she looked. Saint chuckles at the implication that Jay has become a little girl, as he had earlier turned god. Elena speculated that the saint had actually been reborn as an immortal. At this point, the statue still in the hall added that it was very lonely. A snow-white deer with blood-red eyes looked toward another deer. The second deer was equally angry at the first. Suddenly, the two deer get into a fight which causes them to fight and jump on each other. At one moment, a mace lands on the head of the first deer, causing it to fall soullessly, and their battle ends before it can begin. At this moment, Elena was actively scattering all the weapons in the mansion's warehouse. Moving closer, Sally wondered what the girl was doing in their warehouse. Taking Helena by the collar, Sally lifted her off the ground and warned her not to go into the mansion's warehouse. The girl decides to take Elena with her and return to Alice's mansion. Elena was still wondering if she could find a weapon that could destroy all life. Sally nonchalantly carries Helena out of the warehouse, adding that if she had such a thing, they would have been dead a long time ago. Alice at this point sets her grandfather up and asks that he temporarily put on Sally's armor and keep the village well. At that moment, Sally walks in with Elena. Sally puts Helena in front of Alice and adds that she was able to find her in the warehouse while the girl was hiding. Alice, with a sparkle in her eyes, still asked to tell Helena about the affair with the saint. Helena tried to push her sister away with a request that she continue to prepare to leave. Alice was amused that the girl was shy about it. Elena was starting to get annoyed at the way her older sister teased her. Alice asks that Sally place all the knights in positions before they leave, and asks for a few to be selected to accompany them. While the girls were talking and deciding important matters, Elena was quietly trying to leave the room. After successfully getting out of the room, Elena began to wander the empty hallways looking for something interesting. Helena continued to walk down the hallway and ponder what awaited her when she met the saint. Helena noted that she shouldn't worry while traveling because Sally was coming with her. The girl decides to go outside and walk back up to the strange statue. Elena also takes Sally and Alice with her as well. Alice nonchalantly pokes her finger at the statue, thinking it can't hold anything. Sally takes the girl by the cheek and thinks that the girl is just obsessed with her idea, and there's really nothing to find here. Elena reiterates that there is indeed a sword in the statue. Helena abruptly removes her hand. Sally starts screaming, waving her arms around. Elena decides to deal with it herself and asks for a better look at it. Moving closer, Elena spits at the statue of the saint. Sally doesn't hesitate to smack Helen upside the head for desecrating the statue like that. The statue begins to accuse the girl as well. Elena, in turn, starts yelling at the statue in response. The statue immediately begins to apologize for his behavior and asks to be forgiven for his rude voice. Elena forbids the statue to speak. Guffawing, the statue asks the girl not to cry if she keeps talking. Elena gets even more angry with tears in her eyes and declares that she is not crying. Elena turns to Alice and wonders if her sister heard the statue's voice. The girl waves back. Elena decides to climb up the statue to its head. Sally gets closer and tries to take the little girl down. Sally tries to pull the girl away. Elena continued to hold onto the edge of the statue with her weak hands. Managing to pull the girl away, Elena falls face first onto the tiles. Elena raises her head and adds that her sisters may not believe it, but she is sure that a cursed sword is sealed in this statue. Sally didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Alice assumed it was the dark demon sword. The statue was outraged. She didn't understand how Elena was able to know his identity. Elena recalls reading this in one of the library books. Elena also notes that she even managed to find Japanese in Bailey's book. Snapping her fingers, Elena calls out the full name of the sword, making the demon become ecstatic. Elena folds her arms and declares that his former master entrusted him with his power, and therefore the sword automatically belongs to her too. Sword immediately agrees, for he wanted nothing less than to become liberated. Sally, still unable to hear a single voice, suggests that Elena may have a mental disorder. Alice writes it off as post-traumatic stress disorder after being separated from her parents. Elena couldn't listen to all the nonsense the sisters were making up. She wanted to change their minds. Elena asks the sword what she should do to unlock the full power of the seal. Sally puts her hand on the girl's shoulder and wonders if she knows exactly what she's doing. Helena turns to Sally and explains that she's been traveling for a long time and longs to find her true power. Sally suggests that there was a reason why this sword was sealed in the statue of the saint, and it is unknown what will happen after the seal is broken. Elena still wanted to gain this power and asked that she not be hindered in doing so. Sally decides not to interrupt anymore and to observe everything from the sidelines. Sally slowly walks back to her sister and continues to watch. Elena asks her sisters not to worry because she was sure she could handle it. Sword tells her that the girl should make a small incision on her finger and drop some blood on the statue's head. Elena realizes that she has reached the truth. Elena asks Alice to use magic and climb right on top of the statue's head. Alice agrees to help her little sister. Alice begins to pray and use her spells. Elena's legs slowly begin to rise above the floor. Elena gradually rises higher and higher, reaching the head of the statue. Climbing behind the statue, she finds the position she wants. Elena also asks Alice to put one holy shield on her. The girl also agrees and asks the girl to hurry up. Under the shield, Elena decides to go into action. Noting that it's quite warm under the shield, Elena makes a small cut on her finger and lets herself bleed. Elena pours some blood right on the statue's head. The statue is starting to crack a little. Sword thanks the little girl for the work she has done. He couldn't be happy with his freedom. The demon jumps out of the statue abruptly, heading towards Elena with the desire to kill the girl. The sisters realize that Elena doesn't have everything under control. A demon pounces on Elena and takes her hostage. The demon envelops Elena's defenseless body and robs her of the ability to move.